Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's presentation entitled The Architect as a Strategist, presented by Jeff Scott. My name is Michael Marks, and I am the Training and Certification Assistant with ISA Global, headquartered here in Austin, Texas. Before Jeff starts the presentation, if you're not a member, I encourage you to join ISA today. By becoming an ISA member, you will gain access to our IDABOC, archive webinars, discounts on courses and exams, and much more. To register for membership and to get a full overview of all the benefits, please visit www.isaglobal.org. Jeff, I will now turn the presentation over to you.
There. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Scott with Exceller, and today we're going to talk about the role of the architect as strategist. And to start with, let me give you a little bit of an overview of Exceller and kind of how I play in this space. Exceller's a small consulting company. We look at what we do as in the field of strategy management, what we call strategy to execution. But it's an interesting combination at Exceller of a strong set of thought leaders connected to innovative process with some powerful technology to bring all that piece together. And so if you think about building out a capability, the three things you need are people, process, and technology. And so our model kind of integrates all that stuff to help companies actually execute their strategies and make sure that they attain the strategic intent that they were after. And while I've got this fancy VP title and all that stuff, really what I am is a business architecture advocate. What I do is do a lot of speaking and writing and blogging and just generally talking to people one-on-one about business architecture, about the profession of business architecture. A lot of my work is with enterprise architects who are trying to make the transition to being more business architecture focused. I currently publish the Business Architect blog. I was with Forrester Research for a number of years where I wrote over 50 research reports. They're primarily in the enterprise architecture and business architecture space. And I do a lot of speaking. Today is one of those. And I also do, every now and then I do actually have to work for a living and do consulting. But I consult and mentor with a small number of business leaders, business architects, and my job there, in reality, is to help make them successful. So I'm going to jump right in here. And the first part I want to talk about is what I think of as strategy concepts. And the reason I want to do that is I am confident that everyone on the phone has a different idea about what strategy is. And in fact, that's one of the big challenges of doing strategy work, which also gives us, as architects, a big opportunity to help overcome that challenge. So the first thing I would say is all strategy is not the same. There are different types of strategies that people build, different types of strategies that people talk about. So the way I think about it, there are these three large categories. There's business strategy, which is really all around business growth. It's where we play and how we win. So this is what you typically think of as the essence of strategy setting to change the business to about customer acquisition, products and services, geography, where we're going to play, how we compete against our major competitors, those type things. Then there's operational strategy, which is really how we design the organization to execute the business strategy. And I think this is the major place that architects have the opportunity to add tremendous amount of value. And then the third part of this is what I call transformational strategy. And you certainly see this a lot less out there. I don't think there are many organizations that really want to do transformational work. A lot of times they'll talk about, oh yeah, we're going to transform the org. In reality, they do minor changes. But But transformational strategy really is changing fundamentally how we go about doing our work. So you can think of this more as attached to culture, to organizational change, less, well, there is some process work in here, less process work. Most of the process work is in kind of the operational strategy. So to me, these are the three big buckets that strategy falls into. And as we start defining strategy in each of these categories, it looks somewhat different. The second statement I would make about strategy is, well, not all strategy is strategy. And you're going to through the presentation here. But if you go back to the 60s and 70s when strategic planning was really in its heyday, what you really saw was the underlying thought behind strategy was, if we collect enough data and are really smart in how we analyze it, we can predict the future. And so it had this very strong predictive component to it and very heavy in the data analysis range. And strategic planning fell out of favor in the mid-70s, frankly, because it didn't work. I mean, what people figured out is you can't predict the future. You can know more about maybe the future, but you can't really predict it. And what was really happening in the strategic planning process is people were looking at this as a way primarily for financial forecasting to project what the work demand load was. So it was all about demand and resource alignment, whether that's people or financial stuff. And I know I was in a corporate setting from 1980 to 2000, and we, about every 3 years, we would do a strategic plan. And fundamentally, it was put in everything you're doing this year, project that forward to the next year, take some big guesses about how you'd like to spend money in years 3, 4, and 5. And it was never valuable because we would all put in, well, these are all the things we need to do. The CEO would come back and say, well, there's no way we're going to spend that much money, and so here's how much money you get, and we redo the whole plan to match the money, and everybody's happy, and we go on. So it wasn't very valuable, and it really was all about managing resources. Strategy crafting is somewhat different. To me, that's real strategy, and what it's fundamentally focused on is growing capabilities. How do we change the company in more of a fundamental way? So maybe we're going to grow our marketing capability. Maybe we're going to grow our technical capability, or our product development capability, or our manufacturing capability, or our IT capability. Whatever it is, it's much more about growing capabilities. So it's about envisioning new futures. Where do we want to be? Where do we want the organization to be? How do we transform the organization? And here, I'm not quite talking about that huge transformation, but how the organization needs to change. Realigning organizational structure, or distributing the organization because we've become a global player, those kind of things. And it's typically substantive change. I mean, I tend to think that when we're talking about less substantive change, we'll be talking about initiatives as opposed to strategy. And then part of what we're trying to do is create insight and perspective when we're doing strategy work. If we're going to grow capabilities, we need new insights and perspectives about how they need to look. And then the third element here about this is strategy is really, really hard to define. And the reason it's hard to define is everybody has this different perspective. So one, what we hear frequently is strategy is a goal. And you hear that a lot in the business strategy sector, because the business executives really formulate it in terms of goals. So the example here, we want to double the size of the company. That's not really a strategy. It doesn't tell us how we want to do it. It doesn't give us any directional statement around that. So it's more of a goal. We can also see strategy as direction, which is not quite a goal. It's more or more of a qualitative goal, if you want to think of it that way. We're going to become a global company. Well, I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, it's double the size of the company. I know exactly what that means. If we're making $100 million today, we're going to make $200 million tomorrow. Global company, I don't know. Does that mean we're going to be in 3 countries, 50 countries, 100 countries? That's a little more amorphous, but it's a directional statement. And then their strategy is plan, which is more of a smaller scope thing of we're going to move from New York to San Francisco. That's much more of a planning type thing, so it's a less robust view. And then there's also strategy as the entire landscape, which is vision, goals, and what I think of as strategies or direction, and objectives, and you put all that together, and people talk about, oh, this is our strategy, and it has mission, vision, goals, charter, and all those kind of things. So there's a lot of different views of how you might talk about strategy, and this starts leading to the first challenge here, because if we talk about strategy as a goal or a direction or a plan or those kind of things, then it's pretty vague what we mean, and it's open to a lot of interpretation. So what's the point here? I mean, why do we want to do this? And I think that well, there's a lot of reasons to do strategy. Ultimately, it's to create focus and clarity of action here. So the way that I look at this is think of yourself at the center of a compass. So you've got 360 degrees all sitting around you, and you can take off in any direction that you want to. And so the CEO comes down and and says, we want to double the size of the company, for example. People take off in different directions. So one group of people says, oh, we're going to double the size of the company. Let's go buy somebody. Somebody else says, oh, no, we're going to double the size of the company. Let's figure out how to ramp up our organic growth. Let's hire a bunch of salespeople. And somebody else says, oh, we want to double the size of the company. We got to go to Europe. We're going to go to China. Let's start figuring out how to globalize. And so all of a sudden, what you get are these projects that are all conflicting frequently. They headed off in different directions. And so part of the idea here is to give a focus to the vision so that there's clarity about direction, what the aspiration is, in what the goals are at the end, so we can narrow the focus for the actual work that's going to get done. And there's two parts that happen here. First part is kind of setting a planning horizon here. It says, look, how far out can we look? Most companies, honestly, they feel like they're doing pretty well if they can look out 3 years. If you go to Japan, it's 10 years, 20 years, maybe even 50 years. And they have an incredibly long strategic horizon. But whatever it is for you, part of the goal of strategy is to extend that horizon out, and at the same time to focus the strategy tighter. Because if you think about this, I'll go back here. If you notice how wide the strategic boundary is there, the further out you go, the wider that arc becomes. So part of the process is let's think further out, and as we think further out, let's narrow that strategic boundary. And in the part here I want to say about strategy that people don't think about very much is that boundary part, which says we always think about strategy as telling us where to go, what to do, directional. And that's true, but well-defined strategy also tells us what we're not going to do. So if you look at this picture, there's maybe 10 or 15 degrees of direction here that we're going to go in. There's another 300 plus degrees that we're not going to go in. So a whole lot of what strategy is about is focusing the organization and getting it and getting to the point where people know what not to go do. So we all execute strategy in some way, whether we call it strategy or goals or whatever it is. I mean, any organization that's not changing is dying. In today's world, you just cannot stay stable. And how you move an organization forward is through strategy. Yep, we might do it through defining goals or directional kinds of stuff, but in essence, what we're trying to do is create strategy that moves organizations forward. And the challenge is that doesn't work very well. And in fact, this whole thing about strategy execution to me is the number one biggest problem in most large companies today. Harvard Business Review surveyed 1,000 executives in 2010. And the data that came back said 37% said that their companies were really good at strategy execution. 37. That meant that 63% of all these executives that they interviewed thought they were mediocre or worse at executing strategy. Only 23% of those guys blamed external. Remember, 2010, economic times were very hard. They didn't blame the outside organization. I mean, they're outside people or events outside the organization. Their view was that we're very bad, we're not very good at it, and it's our fault. And then when they looked at the implementers of strategy, more than half of them couldn't accurately state what the strategy was. So I'm down here implementing this stuff, and I don't even know why I'm doing it. Robert Kaplan, who is half of the balanced scorecard guys, in a Harvard Business Review article said that 60% of the typical organizations don't link strategic priorities to their budget. 60% don't have a connection between the money they're spending and the outcome they want. And his comment is 95% of employees in organizations don't understand their organization's strategy. And I would certainly say from the consulting work that I've done over the last 10 years, I would say that 95% might be a little out there, but I think it's more than 50%. So somewhere between 50% and 90% of employees in most companies really don't know what the strategy is. And if you think about all the small decisions that are made every day, then you've got to recognize that all kinds of people out there are making these decisions every day, and they may be lucky and they align with the strategy, but at least half the time they're not going to align with the strategy. So the question is, why is this such a problem? I mean, there's a bunch of smart people running companies, and they've got a pretty strong group of leaders there. So why are we so bad? And I mean, we are excruciatingly bad at executing strategy. So I think this is the crux of the problem. So I'm going to show this to you through an example. Executive, maybe the CEO, maybe some other executive comes up with a great idea. Here's our new strategy. Here's where I want to go. And so what he or she does is pulls in typically their direct reports and have a conversation. So if there's only 5 and they're all sitting around the table and they're talking about this new strategy, what happens in that instance right there is this loss of cohesion. And the way to think about this is everybody around the table interprets the conversation differently. They have a different background. They have a different perception of the world. Maybe they're reinterpreting it to line up with their personal model of how they want to run their organization, whatever it is. And that wouldn't be bad if everybody at the table was reinterpreting the same way, but they're not. So if everybody at this table, when they're talking about strategy, interprets it gets 95% of it right, but misses 5% of the intent, but it's a different 5%, then they walk away with 75% of the strategy being cohesive. They have already lost 25% of the cohesiveness just as soon as they walk away from the strategy table. And people that do this frequently tell me that that's pretty on target. So maybe it's only, if all these guys only lost 2%, then okay, they'd walk away with 90%. But typically there's a lot more than 5 people at the table. So I think if you think about that model, that something's being lost there, you can start seeing this. Then it goes downhill from there. I mean, it gets worse as it goes. Because what happens is each of these managers goes back to their organization and they translate what they discussed and what they heard in this strategy meeting, and they translate it to their managers, who translate it to their managers, who translate it to their managers, and this keeps going on down the line. And most of you have experienced this when you were in grammar school. You played a game called Whispers or Telephone or something like that, where the teacher whispered in a student's ear some statement, and that student turned around and whispered to the next student, and it goes around the room, and it comes out the other end, and the teacher says, here's what I said, and that student says what he heard, and everybody laughs. It's just so hilarious. And when you're in grammar school, that is funny. But when it is your corporate strategy that's being converted that way, it's not very funny. It's pretty debilitating. And so what happens by the time you get down to the doers, the people like you and me and others that we work with every day who have to do things to implement the strategy, we have really lost the meaning of most of the discussion. And most of this happens, by the way, unintentionally. It's everybody's got good faith, but there certainly are plenty of cases where some manager in this stream has their own personal agenda and they actively, knowingly reinterpret to fit their model. And again, it just rolls downhill from there. So you get this strategic effectiveness coefficient that's at best around 50% in most companies. And so what that says is, again, the people who are making decisions, who are taking action on a day-to-day basis, are trying to do the best work they can do, but they really don't know what the goal is, what strategic intent is. So part of this problem is that we don't have a good way to articulate strategy. And when you look at most organizations, you can find a lot of strategy type documents. But when you start reading those documents, you don't see much strategy in there. And what I think of when I think of strategy is I think of a directional statement that says, here's where we want to go, and here's some guidelines, guardrails about how we're going to get there, so that it's pretty clear to me how to take action. As long as I can stay inside those guardrails that say, yep, I'm going there, and I'm going there this way, then I've got a pretty good strategy. What you see when you look at people's strategic plans is you do see a few strategies, but you see a lot of aspiration, projects, needs, vision statements, and that kind of stuff. So here's some examples. I worked with a company. We pulled out about a dozen strategy documents of various flavors and reviewed them. And what we found, out of a couple of hundred pages of strategy documents, we had about 6 strategies out of all that documentation. But here are some statements that came out of those documents, and these were labeled as strategies. So the very first thing is simplify existing process to increase efficiencies. Well, that's not quite, you might claim that's a strategy, but it's certainly a pretty low-level one. Maximize market effectiveness. Now, that's not a strategy. That's an aspiration almost, because there's no goal at the end of that. It's just, oh yeah, let's make marketing better. Okay. Develop products and services that are customer-centered. Again, more of an aspiration. Deliver high value to customers. There's the best one there. The very aspirational. No real strategy to that. Develop strategic partnerships to maximize value of services offered. Okay, now maybe we're getting a little bit closer to a strategy kind of thing. So you get this wide range of statements that people think are strategies, but really aren't, because they don't offer enough detail to help you get there. And so this is, again, very common with very smart organizations, that the strategy stuff is all over the place. So if that's what's going on and that's sort of the problem, then what can we do? I mean, as architects, what do we do about this? And the first thing I want to talk about here a minute is kind of a thinking shift in kind of the architectural landscape. What I have found in working with lots and lots of architects is there's an overabundance of focus in operational efficiency. And I understand why that is. And when I was an architect, I spent a lot of time in operational efficiency kind of things, setting standards, rationalizing the application portfolio, working out redundancies, and all that, kind of trying to get reuse. All of those things that I think are focused on efficiency kinds of things. What seems to have happened a lot in the last 5 years as the economy's been tighter and organizations have been tightening their budgets is that EA organizations in particular have been pushed pretty hard to talk about their value and, you know, what are you really doing for us and all that. And so they have, in a lot of ways, have moved to proving their value through getting operational efficiency, so driving out costs so that there's real numbers I can attach to what I do. And that's really good work, and there's nothing wrong with doing that work. But my contention is that there's a lot of people who will do that work, that if you walk away from that work, others will do it. May not do it the way you do it, but they will get operational efficiencies out of the organization to some degree. The second part I would make is point about operational efficiency is this. It's really a hard place to work. And the reason I say that is when you're working on operational efficiency kinds of things, you're coming to the table to take things away, and everybody knows it. So all of you have experienced this. You see that, oh, we have 3 different applications that do the same function. Let's get rid of 2 of them, consolidate on 1. Well, what you're telling 2/3 of the people that use this functionality is, I'm going to take this away from you. Yep, I'm going to replace it with something that's better, but I'm taking away what you know how to use. I'm taking away what you're really good at using. So you're taking things away, and there's resistance. Same way if I come into an organization to figure out how to make their processes more efficient, and part of the outcome of that at the end of the day is to reduce the number of people doing the work. I'm taking jobs away. So part of why people resist this whole idea of enterprise architecture and enterprise business architecture is we're taking things away. I mean, we're coming in and saying we're going to take something away from you, and that creates a kind of a dynamic that just makes life hard. If you look at strategic effectiveness, the reason I think this is so important for architects is, first of all, there aren't many people looking at that. So you've got much more opportunity in that space to make a difference, to differentiate yourself, to create something that's very different out there. All the black belt Six Sigma guys they'll work over there on the efficiency side. They'll eke some money out of the deal. But nobody's really looking at the strategic effectiveness thing, and so that's why you saw the data you saw about why strategies are so hard to execute. So there's a greener field here. The second thing that I think is really important here is we're also bringing things to the table. We're not here to take things away. We're here to create things. We're here to create clearer strategy. We're here to provide models that help business leaders think about their problems differently. We're here to provide research and data to help those decisions. So what we're doing in the strategic effectiveness side is all additive. So I think this is just a good thing to step back and think about a little bit. And it's not like you give up the efficiency stuff. It's just you change the percentage of work that you're doing. So my model is 80% on strategic effectiveness, 20% on operational efficiency. And I think for many organizations, that would be a reversal of how they spend their time. So what does it look like to focus on strategic effectiveness? And so this is sort of another thinking shift, I think, for architects. As architects, what we typically do is think about what we deliver. So we talk about blueprints and artifacts and the kinds of things we create. And we don't think very much about process. We certainly think about the process to create the deliverables. That one we might think about. But I don't think architects have thought very much about the process at large. And so I want to look at strategy execution through the lens of a process. And I'm not suggesting that this is everything architects do. I'm just suggesting that in the strategy world, there's a big opportunity here to get your hands around, to create a process and get your hands around managing that process. And so even though this is a very detailed process that I think in our detail model it has like 25 steps or something, it has six fundamental elements to it. Clarify strategy, identify capabilities, assess those capabilities, determine the gaps in those capabilities, figure out where you're going to invest, monitor progress around that. And that becomes kind of a cyclical kind of thing that you do. So on the strategy, and what I'm going to do is walk through these 6 steps and show you examples and talk about them briefly. So on the strategy clarification side, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do. I recently wrote an article on the service portfolio of business architecture, and I had about 20 services there. But these are the services that I came up with for strategy development and articulation. So things like scenario planning, value mapping, just creating a blueprint or a description, a template of a strategy. Strategy mapping like Kaplan and Norton do, or business model development, value chain analysis. There's a whole bunch of things you can do to help an organization of any size figure out what their strategy is and clarify it. So one way to think about this is kind of this idea of strategy on a page that we use a lot. And again, the idea is to take the element of the idea and really flesh it out really well so that we know what the strategy is, the description. We understand why we chose this strategy because we listed the drivers of this strategy. And we understand the challenges, implications. One of the things that holds strategies back a lot is executives lay out, oh yeah, here's what we want to do. And then a whole bunch of us who really understand what it means to do it realize that, oh my God, there is a whole bunch of implications here and challenges to do this. Do these idiots know what they're doing? And that's kind of a thought process we go through. And the way to overcome that thinking and to make sure that everybody gets on board is to lay it out. Well, yep, we want to do this, and we know that we've got cultural things that need to change because we're risk averse. Historically, we've really done, in this example, we've had poor cross-organizational collaboration. We're pretty poor at innovation, and all of these things are things that need to change. We know it. We know we're going to have to spend more money, those kind of things. By putting those as elements in the strategy, what you do is you knock out a whole bunch of the naysayers and a whole bunch of resistance to the strategy right away, because everybody says, oh, these are the challenges. These are the things I need to help overcome. And so all of a sudden, now people know what to do to support the strategy. So maybe I'm not part, in this case, of the IT innovation organization, but I certainly know how to help reduce aversion to risk. I certainly know how to help collaborate across the organization when those opportunities come up, and I certainly know how I can change my little organization, whatever it is, to be more innovative. So all of a sudden, I've shifted this from, yeah, there's some guys over there who are working on this, but now I know how to support them. I know exactly the kinds of things I can do because the challenges are laid out. Another way that's really powerful to think about strategies is to show how they are different and illuminate them in ways that people can grasp. And one of the tools that we use a lot is what we call the value map. This came from the Blue Ocean Strategy, which is a great book for you to read, and in there they call this the strategy canvas. But the idea of this is to look at what are the customer qualities, look at where our competitors are, and then create a competitive position that's in a different space. So this is the Starbucks example that's used pretty frequently by lots of people. And if you look at the orange line there, that's where when Starbucks started, that's where the industry was, where the customer attributes were, I want my coffee fast, I want it easy, and I want it cheap. And so McDonald's and 7-Elevens and all these places were doing coffee, and it was fast, hot, cheap, pretty convenient. Starbucks, a small coffee company, was looking at that saying, well, we can't make coffee any hotter, we certainly can't get it to people any faster than 7-Eleven can. How do we compete in this market? And what they came up with was a model that said we're going to compete in a different space. We're going to focus on fashion and coffee selection and the ambiance of where you go to get your coffee. Very different than walking into your neighborhood 7-Eleven. And so what they did was they looked at different attributes. They also noticed on price. They said we're not going to emphasize price at all, meaning that they're going to be really expensive, and they are. But what they did was create a different model to compete in the coffee space, so they didn't have to compete directly against the current players. And it's worked out fantastic. So this is a model to show how your company can compete, but you can also use this exact same model internal to look at internal organizations and to look at how to illuminate the differentiation between today and in the future. So here's an example from a project I worked on where we have this model that we call IT Incorporated. where we look at IT organizations from a business standpoint and help them understand how to run the organization more as a business. And so here what we did was, the first thing we did was we go through and mapped what are the customer attributes. So what is the business view of IT? What matters? And of course you got the standard stuff that you would all recognize: lower project costs, predictable outcomes, speed to market, operational efficiency, all these kind of things that the business cared about. And that's what their tell on IT is important. But if you go talk to the business guys and generally just say what's important to you, what you'll find is that, yeah, they want all these things, but what they want more is product innovation, new business opportunities, and things like that. And so what we did was we said, okay, what's really important to the business, laid that all out on a value map, and then mapped the emphasis that IT was currently placing there. So as you might expect, they were placing lots of emphasis on the very things that the business was telling them was important, and they were placing a lot of emphasis on it. Look, they were trying to lower project costs and be really good at operational efficiency, but they weren't paying any attention to other attributes that the business really cared about more, like product innovation. So today, when most businesses talk about product innovation, there is a huge technology component to it. So what this organization figured out is, yeah, we're going to lower the amount of emphasis we place on the traditional kinds of things, and we're going to raise up how much emphasis we place on things like product innovation and new business opportunities. And so with this model, they were able to clearly articulate to the business how their going forward strategy of operating IT was going to be very different. There was going to be do a lot more innovation, bring a lot more things to the table than they had in the past. The next step in this process is to clarify the capabilities that an organization needs to execute their strategies. So again, out of our IT Inc. model, this is a partial IT capability model where, and I'm assuming most of you know what capabilities are and those kind of things, but fundamentally a capability is the organizational skill to do something. So it's not an individual skill, it's not a collection of individual skills, it's kind of an organizational level ability to do something. And typically that capability is enabled through people, process, and technology. And so by building a model that says, here is an operating view of the company of all the capabilities that we need, now we have a common way to talk about these things. And the nice thing about capabilities is they don't change very often, so it creates a very stable, reusable platform for business discussions. And once we have that, now we can talk about assessing it. And in the assessment world, there's really two angles to that. So one is to assess the value, because not all capabilities are created equally. And part of what's going on in most companies today is the money is being spread across all the capabilities fairly indiscriminately, and people are coming up with projects based on ROIs, based on functional improvements, those kind of things. And about half of those don't align with which capabilities you need to support your strategy. So the very first thing is to create this value contribution view that says, look, if these are the 50, 60, 80 capabilities that we have in the company, how much value do each of these contribute to the success of this organization? So you can do this, again, at any level, at the whole company, at IT, you can do this for business architecture. So one of the things I do, for example, when I'm helping a business architecture team start up is, I believe in eating your own dog food. So we apply a business architecture model. We create the capability model for that business architecture team, and we look at it to say, which are your advantage capabilities, the ones that really differentiate you from everybody else. And now we know what capabilities to grow. And once we know that, then we can look at the performance of these capabilities and do a typical kind of heat map view, which gives us the same model we were looking at before. But now what it's done is it's weighted our performance on these capabilities by their value contribution. So I have come out with a very succinct view of the capabilities I need to improve to attain my strategies. So as I go through this whole process, and remember it is a process, now I'm getting finer and finer view of what I want to do. And then once I understand which capabilities need improvement, there's a whole bunch of standard quality management kinds of things I can go through. This is a typical fishbone analysis, or some people call it a 5 why, which says you take your problem and you go through each of these elements and you kind of say, why is this a problem, and then why is that so, and so on. But the idea is to get down to the root cause for each of these capabilities at what they need. And so what typically comes out of this is a people, process, technology view that says, oh, these are the things that we need to change to enhance that capability so that it can support the strategy. And once we know that, then we can create the project portfolio we need that is really the strategic set of work. So if you think about this, what happens today is most work in companies bubble up from the bottom with all those people down at the bottom that don't really understand the strategy or putting project requests in the mix. And now the project office or us as architects or whoever is trying to sort them out and figure out which ones are right. In this model, the need for the project is coming top down, so that by the time we get down to the guys who can initiate it, they're really clear about what projects are needed. So what I've done is created a much tighter portfolio of projects that are all around getting my strategies executed. And then the last step of this is creating tools and techniques and models to monitor this stuff at more of a strategy view. And this is an example here of what I think of as strategy momentum, where what you do is you look at all the different ways that people in the organization could support this strategy or detract from this strategy. And so I think of it as like a stock market ticker. And you can think about strategy kind of like investing in a stock, because a strategy doesn't have an ROI. It's a bet. It's a bet on the future that if we follow this strategy, we're going to get the results we want. And so what we're doing as we're going through is, what's really important to us is how many people sign up to support this strategy. Are they building projects and requesting funding for things that actually link back to developing the capabilities that we need? Are they making organizational choices? Are they hiring people? All of those kind of things, I can put them on this momentum index and get some kind of idea of, are people buying into this strategy, and is the organization supporting it? And so if I put this process in place and I manage this whole thing, what I'm really doing is creating a funnel that puts in broad ideas at the top and comes out at the bottom with the work that really matters. So it's not just all the work that needs to be done, but it's the work that really needs to be done for the organization to attain its vision and its goals. And again, while most of this we think about it as doing this at the enterprise level, we can do this at any level. Every organization has some set of vision and goals. And from that, they can develop strategies, they can understand their capabilities, and drive that on down. The things I like about this model a lot and why it resonates with business executives is that it focuses investments where they'll have the most impact. And by building this model out, it's pretty easy to show executives how this project affects their strategy. And it creates a really direct line of sight from what the organization wants to do to what it actually does do. So it gives the top end of the organization a clear understanding of how the work that's happening supports their vision, and it helps the bottom end of the organization understand what's going on at the top so they can take action that's appropriate. The other thing that happens here that's really powerful is once you cast strategy execution as a process, now I have a foundation for continuous improvement. One of the things you see in strategy work all the time is every year it's all started anew. Very little carryover from the previous year. And so every year you're trying to figure out how to do it all over again. And frequently there are different players and different people involved. But once you design this as a process, now what you've got is a way to say, well, next year when we come through this, we're going to do it the same way, but we're going to improve. We're going to look at how well it worked last year and improve this step. So maybe I've got 3 capabilities that just did not resonate with people last year. Let's change the names, change the definition, or get rid of them altogether, whatever it is. Now I know, but I can still keep the same capability model. I can just continue to tweak it so that everyone, so it gets better and better and better over time. And then the last thing here is something that people don't talk about very much, particularly those of us in IT and EA, but this whole model also is pretty powerful to increase employee engagement. And when you get employees much more engaged with their companies, you get a lot more innovation, you get a lot more productivity. And so how do we drive engagement? Well, the first thing is there are three elements to engagement. This really hits two of them very hard. One is that people want meaning in what they do. And the way they get meaning is they understand the bigger vision, the bigger set of goals, the big picture view. So if I understand the big picture view, even if I have a very small piece in it, I can connect to that, and it provides more meaning into my job. And the second way is by fleshing out the strategies. Once I have clarified the strategies and I've built the guardrails that say do this, not that, now every individual in the organization can take more independent action. And autonomy and empowerment are the second or the second way you drive engagement, so that people know where the organization is going and it has meaning, so they have a lot of motivation to help get it, and they have the tools to do it because now we've created a strategy that lets them go act autonomously and feel comfortable that they're doing the right thing. And then, of course, personally and very self-centered, this also creates a very integrated and ongoing role for EAs. I mean, if this is a process and you're going to run it almost every day or certainly every month to make sure everything's working like it should and cycle back through every year, this gives the architects a great way to interact with business leaders, and it gives them a structured way to do that on an ongoing basis and to constantly be looking at ways to improve and embellish and deepen the entire model. So to kind of summarize all this stuff, a couple of statements here. One is that how the EA strategist can engage here is not setting strategy, creating strategy, or doing any of that. That's the business guys do that. But what they can do is help focus management's thinking by using typical traditional architecture-type tools, frameworks, and models, and those kind of things. They can help clarify the direction for the company by taking the strategy and fleshing it out, and then playing it back to management and saying, hey, I'm guessing here. I'm just kind of a poor, dumb IT guy trying to figure out our strategy. Did I get it right? And help them, and kind of help them along at getting a better view. I think we also have when we start talking about strategy, we're looking for new ideas, new opportunities, and I think architects are some of the best thinkers in companies, and so we have lots of opportunity to do that. We're well connected across most companies, but at least in IT and all the tendrils it has out there. And so I think there's a lot of things that the EA strategists can do. And I think the last one here is to be proactive. In other words, help drive change. And I see a lot of architecture organizations that I think are passive. In other words, they think that my job is to create a blueprint, to create the model, and then the organization should just line up about that. And I don't think that works very well. I think we can be much more proactive at driving strategic change. And so I kind of have this just do it model, which says you don't need permission. You don't need some organizational declaration that, yep, you're now engaged in strategy. You just need to go start doing it wherever you can do it. I mean, we can all build capability models. We can certainly all assess what work's going on in IT and relate that back to capabilities, and then we can take a stab at relating that back to strategy. We can do this whole model bottom up. We can do it in a small organization for the whole organization. We can do it for just IT. There's all kinds of ways to do strategy work and to start down the road. And it's just kind of, I would talk about J.K. Rowling in here for a second. She spent 5 years writing the first Harry Potter book. Nobody told her to go do it. Nobody told her people would buy it. Nobody gave her anything. She went and wrote this book. And when she tried to get it published, she was turned down 12 times. And so, you know, now just step back and think about this. The Harry Potter series has probably been the most successful book ever known to man outside of the Bible. I mean, I think that would be an accurate statement. And yet, 12 people turned her down. So you start thinking about, well, now, how great is business architecture? However great, or enterprise architecture, how great do you think these things are? Well, they're great, but they're probably not Harry Potter great. So there's a lot of work you got to do, and there's probably a lot of persistence you have to show to kind of get over the hurdle. And in fact, the first person that published the Harry Potter books, the first run was 500 books. Not 5,000 or 50,000 or 500,000. It was 500 books. And almost a half of those were proof copies. So these guys, nobody believed that this thing was what it was. But the way she got there was not talking about it and talking about it. She produced it and said, look, here it is. And then she kept after doing it. Jay Leno's story is another very interesting story that I relate a lot to architects because it has this just do it approach. You may or may not know, Jay Leno is a big car buff, and he's got this huge car collection, and he likes to talk about cars and all that. Well, when he was a kid, he went down to the Cadillac dealership, because in wherever it was he was living, that was the fanciest car in town, and he was trying to get a summer job, and he went down there and talked to the manager and said, I'm looking for a job, and like cars, want to work here. And the guy says, well, we're not hiring. So Monday morning, Leno shows up, walks around the back to the car wash, lowest job at the whole place, and says, hey, I'm the new guy. And he starts washing cars. And at the end of the week, the manager of the dealership happened to be walking by, and he sees him there, and he looks at the guy that runs the car wash and says, what's he doing here? And the guy says, oh, he's the new guy. He's really good, works hard. And he looks at Leno and says, well, I told you I didn't have any jobs. He said, yeah, I thought I'd just make myself useful till maybe you did. Well, he got hired. And the point of all that being that for a lot of this stuff, and I think strategy falls into that category, it's just go do it. Do it wherever you can do it, whenever you can do it. And eventually what you will wind up doing is creating things that people see value in, and they'll want more of it, and they'll see you as the person that can do it. So with that, I just want to say I hope everyone will stay in touch. I have all kinds of ways you can reach me, and I love to talk about this kind of stuff with people. I think we will be distributing these slides as a follow-on, so this will be in there, but you can get to me through Exceller, LinkedIn, follow me on Twitter. But the most important thing here is subscribe to The Business Architect, where I talk about business architecture, leadership. Sometimes I'll drift off into something else, but typically I publish every Monday some idea around business architecture, strategy, innovation, kind of things. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Michael for questions.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for that great presentation. If anybody has a question, please kindly raise your hand, and I will unmute your microphone.
Got to be some questions here. I'll just tell you, when I do these things live, I tell everybody they can't leave the room till I get at least 3 questions. I don't think I can pull that off virtually, but questions, comments, challenges.
Anything. Well, it looks like no one has raised their hand here, Jeff. Oh, wait, we have one here.
Okay.
I'm working on a startup, and I want your opinion. Could you be a little bit more thorough in your question? One person is asking, could you please show the slide again with your contact information?
Yeah. Yep, but again, just send me a note, and we'll schedule some time to talk. One of the cool things about my job is I get a lot of leeway here, and I enjoy talking to people about these things because that's how I formulate my ideas. I think there's a lot of I think it's easy to sit back in your in your own little world and come up with crazy ideas. But what what I have done all my life is really spend a lot of time talking with people, and so the kinds of ideas that I've talked about here and that I've formulated here just aren't weird ideas that I came up with, because I drank too much bourbon last night. These are ideas that are formulated out of looking at how organizations work and talking to people that struggle with making them work, and talking with tons and tons. I have talked to thousands of architects over the last 10 years, and listened to their challenges and what they're trying to do, and all that kind of stuff. So I love to talk to people about this stuff.
Okay, Jeff, we have a question. Could you please give a couple of examples of good strategy statements?
Well, off the top of my head, I'm not going to do very well at this. I'll tell you what I am going to do. I'm going to run back to this one as an example, because this is one I actually worked on. If you look at the top here, I'm going to read this because because I know it's pretty small. Is the description here is create an organization, process, tools, and culture to drive a tenfold increase in IT's ability to find, experiment with, develop, and implement new ways to exploit technology, to create new products and service models for our business customers. So I'm gonna decompose that just for a second here. First of all, it is, what do we want to do? It's organization, process, tools, and culture. So we've been very specific about what needs to change. And there's a goal there, tenfold increase in IT's ability to do this stuff. And so when I think about strategy statements, this one is a little more objective driven than most. But what you like to think of as strategy is, I've got a vision for the organization. So visions are typically fluffy and airy, and we want to be the innovation leader in the world in technology. That would be a good vision statement. But what I do around that is I put goals, and goals are typically qualitative statements about what does that mean. And then for each of those goals, I've got one or more strategies that say, here's how I'm going to attain them. And so here, how I'm going to attain it is I'm going to create an organization. I'm going to put processes in place. I'm going to buy the tools I need, and I'm going to work out the cultural issues I need to meet the goals. And the goals are to implement new ways to exploit technology and create new products and service models for the business. So to me, that's a relatively tight statement. The value of a really tightly done strategy statement is it has some goal, and again, typically I think of that goal as being objective as opposed to qualitative as opposed to quantitative. So typically not directly measurable, but then what I'm doing is I'm saying, and I'm going to get there this way. So back to earlier statement I made, I think I could say we want to double. Our strategy is to grow the company through acquiring smaller companies that are in our adjacent geography. Now what I have done is I haven't just said I want to grow the company. What I have said is I want to grow the company, qualitative goal, but I've also said here's how I want to do it. I'm going to buy smaller companies. I'm not going to do any mergers of equals. I want to buy them ones that are in my own geography so I can expand my geography out. I'm not talking about going to the other side of the country. I'm not talking about going to China or going global. So what I've done with that statement is I've created a set of what I think of as guardrails to say, look, here we're going to grow the company. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at acquiring small companies, and we're going to look at acquiring small companies in our geographic footprint or adjacent footprints. So it's those kind of elements I think that make a good strategy statement.
Okay, I have a few more questions, and I'll just read them all to you real fast, Jeff. Do you have any suggestions on EA governance? What are the first steps for startups? And have you looked at business motivation model and how it relates to your thoughts on strategy?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the startup question. Love to talk about that more. If that means business startups, or I'm not sure I know what that means. I'm very familiar with the business motivation model. Have looked at that in detail. I think the business motivation model, by the way, is a great place to get definitions of strategy components. That they do really well about talking about goals and strategies and tactics and outcomes. And I do think the modeling part of that is not so important other than to help understand how the elements fit together. I mean, business guys are not going to care about how the model looks, but I do think that's a great document to read to help you understand the elements of strategy and tactics. I mean, because if you want to understand something, you have to understand the things around it and how those pieces go together. And it's also a great place. This is where I got some of my definitional kind of thoughts, is to go to think about how do I want to define it. So a great example of that is objectives. About half the people out there will say an objective is a quantitative statement. So it's measurable. And then about half the people out there will say, no, it's qualitative, and so a goal is quantitative, and an objective is qualitative. I'm sorry, I'm all backwards here. Let's say that again. A goal is qualitative, and an objective is quantitative. So about half people see it that way, and about half people reverse those definitions. So it's not important. There's no theoretical correctness here, but it's important for you to have some consistency. So I think you'll get that from the business motivation model. On EA governance, I can't answer that in the short run, and the reason I can, I'm happy to talk to anybody about this, but when I start talking about governance, people get really frustrated with me because I believe that here's my statement about governance. If you look, and I did this when I was at Forrester, if you survey EA guys and you ask them about governance, most EA organizations have a governance mechanism. And then when you ask them how well it works, the vast majority of them tell you it doesn't work very well at all. And yet we still talk about governance as a best practice. So think about that again. What do you call something that lots of people do and it doesn't work? I don't call that a best practice. I call that a worst practice. And so I think the way we approach governance today is a worst practice. And I think the way we should be thinking about governance is how do we create collaboration structures and influence structures so that we don't have to have this formal authoritarian kind of view of governance that doesn't seem to really work anyway. And as a hint to that, by the way, when I ran my EA team, I had 5 guys in EA, and I had 125 people working to build the EA reference model. And all of none of those guys, out of 5 worked for me, the other 120 worked for somebody else. And what we built was a collaborative, and I called it governance model, that really focused on how do I get everybody to engage in building, because when they engage in building, they engage in buying in. And I have a great story to that whole thing. It was phenomenally successful. So if whoever's asked that question, you want to know more about that, send me a note. I'm happy to talk to you and tell you what we did and how we did it and why I think it works.
Okay, great. Well, Jeff, thank you for the great presentation. Please remember that this webinar will be available for reviewing on our website, available to all ISA members. Please continue to check the ISA's calendar for upcoming events such as webinars, training courses, and certification exams. We thank you, Jeff, and we thank you everyone for attending today.
Thank you.